Deep greeted the quiet afternoon with a soft, hello. Her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves outside the small countryside house. She had just finished sorting through a pile of potatoes. Some slightly rotten, some still good enough to save. It was the kind of simple task she did every day. But today her hands moved slower, her heart heavier. The little home felt cluttered, yet strangely empty. A few more days, she told herself. She would ask the landlord to clear out the unused things so NHI could have more room to play. But all she could truly think about was James, where he was, why he hadn't called, and why her chest tightened each time she remembered the sound of the automated voice telling her his number couldn't be reached. That afternoon, a woman from the hospital came to speak with her. She told her about James's mother, how badly her condition had worsened, how urgent the surgery was, how the cost reached $500 million, maybe less if they had insurance. The weight of that number felt like it pressed right onto Deep's shoulders. Even though it wasn't her mother, it was James's mother, and James wasn't here, and the silence stretching between them felt louder than any argument ever could. As evening settled, Deep cooked dinner while little NHI played nearby. The child was restless, full of innocent longing that made Deep's heart ache even more. "Oi, will Uncle James come to see me today?" NHI asked with eyes too hopeful. Deep knelt down and smoothed her hair gently, explaining that he was probably still at work, but he would visit in a day or two. She tried to believe her own words, but even her voice trembled at the edges. Dinner was a struggle. NHI cried, saying food didn't taste good without James. Deep coaxed her with patience and tenderness, promising that eating well would make James proud when he returned. When she finally picked up the phone to let NHI hear his voice, only the cold, distant message answered her. "The number you have dialed cannot be reached." The disappointment in Nee's eyes cut deeper than Deep expected, and she hurried to reassure the little girl, telling her they would try again later. That night, after NHI fell asleep, Deep whispered a prayer into the quiet darkness, asking for peace, for safety, for strength, especially for James, wherever he was. The next morning passed like any other, brushing teeth, washing faces, preparing breakfast, convincing NHI that school was important even when she wanted to stay home. Everything looked normal, but the silence in the house carried a constant tremor, like a storm waiting to break. And then, unexpectedly, the storm softened instead. Around midday, when light rain began to fall, a motorbike stopped at the gate. Deep turned, her breath catching when she saw him, James. Drenched, exhausted, yet unmistakably there. NHI ran to him with a cry of pure joy. And he lifted her into his arms. But his eyes never left Deep. He explained everything, his mother, the hospital, the broken phone, the storm of problems keeping him away. He apologized, not with excuses, but with regret. Deep listened quietly, her emotions a tangled mix of relief, fear, and the lingering bruise of disappointment. She told him she was tired of hoping and hurting. She told him she couldn't keep doing this. And for a moment, the rain seemed to fall harder, as if it understood. But James stepped closer, not demanding, not begging, simply speaking with a sincerity she couldn't ignore. He told her he had gathered the money for the surgery. He told her that through everything, he realized where his heart belonged. He told her she and NHI were the family he wanted to return to, not out of obligation, but love. He didn't ask her to forgive him. He only asked for time. He promised he would wait. A month, a year, as long as it took. Hearing that, something in her chest loosened, not quite acceptance, not quite forgiveness, but a softness she thought she had lost. When he left that evening, the sky was no longer stormy. NHI held Deep's hand and asked if Uncle James would come again. Deep smiled gently and said he probably would, because he said he would wait for NHI, and for her. As James's figure faded into the warm glow of the streetlights, a quiet breeze slipped through the doorway, carrying with it a sense of fragile hope. And in that moment, Deep realized that sometimes a person doesn't return to be welcomed right away. They return to prove they never truly left.